And I was setting it up, and I was like, oh no, it's already 5:59 Pacific, and I was like, I gotta go. And then I'm like letting us in, and it was still 5:59. So we are very punctual tonight, this evening. My sweet friends in the voiceover community, welcome. I'm still letting folks file on in. We are so happy that you are here with us at this Ask Me Anything. It's been a minute since I've been with you, though, David. I think you were maybe flying solo without me. I'm sure you were amazing, and I'm sure you brought lots of glitter and color, and you made up for it. You did your best Vaughn impression. I'm sure it was really good.
Complete with makeup, Siobhan. Complete with makeup.
I believe it, just pink in the square and all of it. So as you all are filing in, hello and welcome. If you've never been here before, my name is Siobhan. I am your host for this evening's hour of voiceover Q&A and talking and hanging out and chatting with our special guest. Before I introduce our special guest, the person I have been, chatting with back and forth, or bantering, if you will. My goodness, it's like what we do, like whatever. It's been so long. David Goldberg, our Chief Edge Officer, to my Zoom left. Dang it, right, to my Zoom right.
Left, right, up, down. It would be so cool if we could actually take the squares on Zoom, move them around, sequence them, make it like the Brady Bunch or whatever. It'd be fun. The Brady Bunch were like pre-Zoom. You guys know what I'm talking about? All of you out there? How many people are there? 76 of you. How many remember the Brady Bunch? Like with the squares and the 9 squares?
David's
I might watch some reruns. So I think I showed my kids some Brady Bunch. My kids have never seen Brady Bunch. Wow.
Y'all, David's over here making a revelation about Brady Bunch that a lot of people made, 3 years ago. But yes. We are, David's with us, and our special guest this evening, he's been with us once before, and we've got him again. He's on my Zoom left because it's a mirror. There we go. We have Brian Wiggins. Brian.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. I was saying to him earlier, I can't complain. My Angelinos, April's different for us than it is in New York. I gotta say, it's I don't mind it. I don't mind a sunny April. That's my feeling. So y'all, we are here at this Ask Me Anything, well into our 3.5 years of doing this. Y'all, the way we structure these sessions is that we're going to talk about voiceover. We're going to use the chat because you all are muted, because it would be really chaotic if you weren't. But you can choose to watch this in the gallery mode. The gallery is where you can see everybody. I enjoy the gallery mode, but if you watch it in speaker, then you get to blow up my face, and I don't blame you for wanting to do that. The chat is where we ask each other the questions, and by each other, I mean, we have whole conversations, and now you can reply. If you've updated your Zoom, you can reply to comments. You can heart react to specific comments. So I love a chat, as I am a Zoom queen. So the chat is a great place to hang out, and it is where you will ask questions to Brian and David. And to Brian specifically, I would recommend you ask about audiobooks, only because that is what we are featuring him on this month, and his special upcoming class. And as we get into the vibe, and as people are saying hello and where they are, 83 in Nashville, Brady Bunch, yes, all my beautiful people. Let me start by actually just asking Brian what I like to do. You can give us a little bit of a little abbreviated biography on how you got into voiceover, and then how you found yourself in a Zoom room with this lady wearing glitter, talking to you with a lot of energy for,
I'm
6
still
p.m.
asking myself that question. No, I man, I guess it's been over 4 years ago, and I decided to take the plunge and give voiceover a shot. I had been working corporate jobs, and I was like, it's time to try something different. And why not finally give this thing a shot? This thing that I had been aware of and thought about for a very, very long time. And like I do with most things in my life, I ran at it and left a Brian-shaped hole in the wall. As I ran towards it, made a ton of mistakes. And at some point, 3, 4, 5 months into that, I finally pulled my head out of my butt and said, all right, maybe I should get some education. and had heard about Edge and started working with Edge and worked with James Andrews and Jen Sims and Jay Snyder, who, I know is not coaching anymore. Unfortunately, he just got too busy. So it's a good thing for him. But yeah, and just finally, got over it and said, I got to do this. And I did it. And then things got much better. And I've been steadily growing the voiceover stuff since. And then I got a surprise email from someone, I forget who it was, emailed me back in November of last year, and was like, "Hey, would you like to be a coach?" And that was a whole thing. And then David convinced me that I was going to be okay with it. And here we are. I think that's the short version.
Yeah,
love
I'd like to fill in a blank there. So Brian is amazing. He is so good. But in all the years that I've had Edge, we have interviewed probably hundreds of coaches. And what I've learned is that there's a huge difference between voice actors who are talented and voice actors who can teach. There's such different skill sets. Brian had the ability to teach as well as being an amazing voice actor. And so, yeah, I spoke with him and I said, would you be interested in this? I really thought that he could offer something. What's interesting about Brian's background is that he has done a lot of different types of work. So he has really like a comprehension of the entire industry. And he's also, Brian, as you know, you've done so much in the audiobook world. It's amazing. And he has just this down home at ease, it is what it is kind of voice. And it's wonderful. So he's been doing great. And students who have worked with him have just really done super well. So thank you, Brian.
No, thank you. Okay.
It's a shame everybody's so mean here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, guys, come on. Say something nice.
So, when we talked about we were featuring Brian, I suppose I can take this moment as we're kind of settling in. I'm still letting my folks in to make a little announcement about Brian's class, which is intro to this thing. We got a little acronym for you that is called AC. Oh my gosh. And Teresa says Brian is lovely to work with.
Thank you, Teresa.
We do compliments. We love to give them. So they are welcome here. So Brian's class upcoming here at Edge Studio, I'm dropping in the chat, is Intro to ACX. It's Sunday, May 7th. And Brian, first of all, can you tell us what is ACX?
I have no idea. Oh, wait, I'm teaching that class. Crap. No, ACX is the Audible Creators Exchange. It's basically a back-end website that sits behind audible.com, where authors or rights holders, people who have the rights to a book, can connect with producers and narrators in order to have their audiobook produced. And what's really nice about it is that is the only barrier there. There's no nothing else to get in the way. There's no membership fees, anything like that. And it's a great way for narrators who would like to try or do audiobooks to connect with all sorts of authors, from people who are just getting started and have published their first book, or people who have been doing this for a while now. So yeah, it's a very nice, very accessible site that if you're looking to do audiobook work is a really, really great place to get started.
Okay, awesome. And it is where you got started in your audiobook journey, yes?
It is, yeah. I when I first was doing all my Google searches, and trying to figure out, okay, where do you go get the work? Like everyone wants to know. ACX is one of the sites that came up, and I was checking it out. Like, okay, audiobook work. And here's this. You can do royalty share where you don't get paid up front, you get paid royalties if the book sells. And I felt better about that, because that way, if I completely borked it up, all right, well, at least I didn't cost that guy cost that person any money. They essentially got the stuff for free. So that's how I got started. And I've got a few authors that I still work with 4 years later, that they were some of my first clients, the first projects. I did a book for Piers Anthony when I first started, which is like, I didn't know who he was when I first started. Then a friend of mine is like, oh, I love Piers Anthony. And I didn't realize that he's a guy. Cool. So yeah, I got a chance to do some pretty cool work on there.
Brian, this is coming in from Dan. How long did it take you to get your first hour of an acceptable recording?
Oh,
And I
okay.
think,
I'm trying to think. So is that? I guess. So if it's just how long did it used to take me to get a usable hour? Uh,
yeah, let me,
my ratio used to be around 4 or 5 to 1.
Wait, we need to clarify though, when you're talking ratio,
yeah,
Brian, if you're talking with editing or without editing. And when you say 4 to 5, I'm assuming you mean with editing, but I'm not sure.
Yes. So in order for
let me
I'm
take it
sorry.
back even further than that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you guys can hear the dogs in my neighborhood, but they're very active. So when we talk about recording for an audiobook, we're like talking about like getting through reading out loud for many, many pages. And for my new people, it's so much fun to read. We love words. If you're interested in audiobooks, you love a story, but things really change when you're reading an entire book out loud. Even if you're it's a totally different animal, right? So this is a great question, because if you were like me, you stepped into an audiobook class like, I'm awesome. And then you were like, oh my God, it's been a while since, without stopping, without maybe we're actors, maybe we have these other histories, or maybe we're just lovers of books. It changes everything when you're even just reading it out loud. First of all, then you have to record it. You have to edit it, right? So when we're talking about your first acceptable hour of recording, it's big. Like that encompasses a lot. So Brian, with my notes and David's notes, now here's your answer. Now
Now,
go.
yeah, I'd say so with editing, because yeah, with audiobooks, yeah, you have to edit that audio, all your mistakes out, so that way you have it nice, clean edit and acceptable. And yeah, it used to take me to get an hour of finished audio that would be acceptable to submit to ACX. It used to take me probably 4 to 5 hours. Because I would have to go through, I used to do what's called dog clicker editing, which is where as I'm making mistakes, I'm making a noise in the microphone, either clapping my hands or snapping or something. And then once I was done recording, I'd have to go back and edit all that stuff out. And then I'd have to go back and listen to the track as I have the manuscript there to make sure I said all the words correctly. And then I'd have to go and re-record and fix all the mistakes. Um, and when you first start, you make a lot of mistakes. So yeah, it took me it was I'm gonna say average, probably about 4 hours of all of that before everything was finally like good to go. I will say that it was probably a good month or two before I actually had what would be considered usable audio now, because I was making the mistake of, oh, I'm going to put compression on this, and I'm going to have all these noise reducers and gating and all this other stuff. And that's how I learned that, no, wait, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to have raw audio. Now I'm around, I think the last time I measured it, I'm at 1.8 hours for every finished hour, because I've gotten better at narrating. I do different kinds of editing now and recording processes, and there's different things I do now that make the process so much easier. So I'm able to turn around audiobooks much faster now. So, but yeah.
Let me throw in. So for most people who begin, their first hour is even like 6 to 1, 7, or even 8 to 1. In other words, for anyone who's out there, and when you get your first audiobook, it's overwhelming. Like, just go into your first project knowing that it's going to be really, really difficult. Getting through an audiobook, the first one, is difficult. The stamina you need is amazing. The mental stamina, and even the physical stamina to stand still with your mouth relative to the microphone in that same position for such a long time. The consistency in your voice you need. There's so many elements. Remembering what different characters sound like, remembering how or where you made mistakes, so you can go back and find them easily. As Brian said, he'll clap, so you see a peak in the WAV file, and then you know where to kind of jump to where there's a mistake. And I don't know, but on average, most newcomers don't start at a 4 to 1 ratio like Brian. Honestly, Brian, your starting point was very fast. Most newcomers are at a 6, 7, or even 8 to 1 ratio, meaning it takes them 6 or 7 or even 8 hours to complete 1 hour of audiobook. And let me throw this other thing in that's so important. A lot of people out there in the voiceover world look at audiobooks and they say, I won't do audiobooks. It pays nothing. It's not worth it. And
Yes,
that's
it
because
is.
they're saying, yeah, there's a 6-to-1 ratio. And maybe you're only making, when you're brand new, you're making $100 an hour or $150 an hour. So you figure if you're making $150 an hour and it takes you 6 hours to get through that book, what is that? $25 an hour? Right? I hope my math is correct on that in front of everyone.
I was a communication major, so I have no idea.
Okay. But what happens then at some point, you get your ratio down to 1.8 as Brian's is. And honestly, that's very fast. It's extremely fast. Most audiobook narrators are like a 2.5 ratio, 2.5 to 1. But so even if you're at a 2 or a 3 to 1 ratio, and now you can earn a bit more money, maybe you're making $150 or $200 an hour. You divide that by your 2.5. Now you're making much nicer money. And it's also you kind of look at a project and think, well, maybe I'm pulling out $75 an hour or $100 an hour, but there's the volume, right? A typical book, an unabridged book, averages about 10.5 hours long. So
Mhm.
there's also that volume that you can look at and say, but this is like 10 1-hour jobs in one shot. It's like giving a client a volume discount. And I don't know. It's great work. If you like reading, it's terrific work. Just again, know that first project is a pain in the rear end. You'll probably pull your hair out and say, what did I get myself into? But just push through it. Let us help you if you want. Ask for, coach with Brian. Like he'll show you those shortcuts. So you go from a 4-to-1 ratio down to a 1.8. And just stick with it, because if you get through that second book and the third book, each book gets easier and easier.
True.
This is a prop. You know what? This is actually that was a great plug, David, because Brian, we are offering a special on coaching packs with Brian. So in the chat here, you will see a little link to get a private coaching, a 3-pack for Brian. And with that package of private coaching comes his audiobook class, his intro to ACX. So if you're like, Brian seems cool and his ratio is good.
His ratio is excellent.
That's how I'm measuring people these days. The ratio. I sound like I don't even know what I'm doing. Okay. So you should check out this dealio, because Brian is amazing and you can learn from him, and sweet discounts because you are here with us and 99 other people. So amazing. Okay, we love it. And yes, everything that has been said, highly recommended that you are a person who loves books. If you are a person who loves voices and doing voices, that does not mean that you will love audiobooks. Like totally different kinds of things. I just want to prepare people for everything that we are saying. It's a specific line of rewarding work. Now,
I will say, going off that, because you mentioned about doing the voices. If most people, I'm going to say that most people that I've dealt with, coaching and just talked with, got into voiceover for the same reason I did, because we love animation, character voices. Mel Blanc, growing up listening to Mel Blanc do every voice ever. Frank Welker, some of these legendary voice actors that are like the voice of my childhood. I know it is very, very unlikely that I'm going to get the opportunity to voice an animation. I just know, because there's not a lot of work. It's a very small percentage of the work, and there is a cadre of incredibly talented, experienced people that are already doing it. So, not to say it can never happen, but I know that it's not likely, and I don't want to move to LA. Sorry, Siobhan. But doing some audiobooks, like some fantasy and sci-fi books, I get to scratch that itch, because authors sometimes want to have like full-on character voices, and so I do get a chance to scratch that character itch by doing that too. So there is that. But
yeah, and mystery, I think right now or last year, I think mystery, thriller, and erotica were the 3 largest growing subgenres of audiobook.
Brian, why
no one wants to hear me doing erotica.
I was literally about to ask you about your erotica career. Okay, it's a late night show, y'all. Yeah. I'm going to do a little something with a show of hands, because I have a comment that says, I have a profile on ACX and have submitted at least a dozen auditions, but 0 accepted. Seems like they keep giving Brian and about 3 or 4 other actors all the work. Can I have a show of hands for people who have auditioned 12 times? 12 times for something. maybe 15 times, maybe 100 auditions. Okay. And maybe you've gotten a couple jobs after 100 auditions, right? Yes, 3. Okay. Thank you all for participating. The name of the game is spinning the wheels. I mean, I'll let Brian take it from here, but I just wanted to have some solidarity and say, like, I know 12 auditions is a lot by, standards of whatever, but by standards of this industry. Brian, you want to talk a little bit about audition to booking ratio?
Yeah, I mean, we're in the rejection game. That's just it. And it's the kind of rejection where you'll never know. Now, ACX, you'll find out because it'll say when the project closes, it'll tell you you weren't chosen for this project. But in voiceover and acting you'll put the audition in, and odds are you will never hear back and you'll never get any feedback. And it can be maddening and it can be annoying because it's like, I want to know what I'm doing. And you'll never know. I don't know what my ratio was. I know I auditioned and I would get some projects, I wouldn't get others. I audition now. I just auditioned for a bunch on ACX within the last month or so, and I've slowly heard back no on all of them. So I'm not one of so I might be getting some of the gigs. I'm very, very fortunate right now in that because I've been doing this for 4 years and doing so many audiobooks that right now the fish are jumping into the boat with me. I've got authors that I've been working with for years, and every time they write a sequel, that's a book they get to do. They've introduced me to people and they're hiring me there. And I work with RB Media, which is like one of the big audiobook producers. And they basically email me once every few months with books. So I've been very, very fortunate that I have not had to recently words. Yeah, I talk for a living. I have not had to audition for a lot of audiobooks lately, but that's me working consistently with this for 4 years. And I will say some of that stuff is with like 2 or 3 different authors. And if they go away, I'm up a creek. So I know I need to get more. I need to like diversify on the narration and commercial front. Yeah, I'm still auditioning all the time for that stuff. And I don't know what my booking ratio is because I tend to audition and I completely forget about it. Once I hit that send button, I have zero. I couldn't tell you what I auditioned for today. I couldn't tell you what I auditioned for last week. I have no idea. The only time it's so that way when I hear back from, if I get the job, it's a happy surprise. So that's, I don't know if that's helpful.
No, I think it is. It's very helpful because it's like that even in our production department. We get web leads every day and calls every single day from multiple production companies and all sorts of companies, including audiobook publication companies. And we don't win every job, but we're super busy. But at some point, like you start winning one and it becomes a repeat client. And that's really like, that's where you need to be because once you get those repeat clients, then the work is coming to you, which is terrific.
And a lot of voiceover work too is having positive relationships and maintaining those clients, like everything that that David and Brian are saying. Speaking of voices, we'll say character work. There's a question which is, are you asked to do character voices when you do audiobooks? And I mean, do you want to talk a little bit about the kind of like character work you do in some of your books?
Yeah, it really depends. It depends on the genre. It depends on the author. Nonfiction, obviously, I'm not going to be doing character voices for nonfiction. It doesn't really fit the genre very well. When I'm trying to think. So a series that we actually just wrapped production about maybe a month and a half ago on a series, and it was the final book of the series. So it was kind of like a little bittersweet to finish it because this was one of my very first clients. The author and I have become friends. We chat. But it was a swashbuckling fantasy series. And so we part of it was developing voices for the characters. And part of it was just figuring out, kind of in context, and she gave me a lot of free reign just to kind of figure out what I wanted to do with it. I think only one or two times she had notes for me. And one of them was because I had started doing a voice for the one villain, and she had written back and said, if you want to do that voice, it's fine, but this is what was in my head. And she referenced a character from the One Piece anime. And then I listened to it and I was like, oh, I could do something close to that. And she knows that I'm not going to do a dead-on impersonation of it because that's not how this works. But I understood like the essence of what she was getting at, and I changed the character's voice to match that. But yeah, it's a lot of fun to do that. It can also be a little challenging because there's so many characters that sometimes you have to just sort of throw a voice. If you want to do character voices, you're always gonna have to have a little bit of a difference between characters. There always needs to be a little difference when you have two characters in a scene speaking with each other. Just for the listener, how far you want to go with that is up to you and up to the author. But even with multiple characters in a scene, if they're minor characters, I won't do as much, and I'll recycle voices constantly. And just because they're here for 2-3 lines, and no one's gonna remember that character. It's more just to keep the plot moving along. And I feel good about doing that because Matt Mercer does that all the time in Critical Role, and it's perfectly fine that he does that. And if you're gonna, you can't criticize that dude for doing that. So it's, yeah, you get to have some fun. I get there's so much fun you can have on that. Yeah.
We got Dungeons and Dragons people in the house. I haven't seen the movie yet. I really want to go. But so yeah, so this is great. And on this kind of subject of character work, and we talked about your first usable hour, right? Noreen, what's up, Irish name, is asking how much time out of the 4 to 5 hours did you spend narrating, and how much went into editing?
Oof.
Like which part, great question. I mean, it's gonna vary for everybody though. It's,
Yeah. I'm trying to think back. It was probably, man, I want to say of those 4 hours, hour and a half to 2 hours was probably spent narrating. And that might be, I don't know, maybe about an hour and a half to 2. I'm trying to remember. Most of the time was spent editing and doing quality assurance, which is making sure I said all the words correctly. That was the vast majority of the time. And then when I switched up to punch and roll or punch and run recording, which is where I can when I make a mistake, I can just punch in right where I made my mistake and keep on recording. That dramatically reduced my time. And then I found a website that does QA very, very accurately. And yes.
Positron. Yeah, I was thinking of bringing that up at some point. Yeah, it's
a
great.
lifesaver. It was, oh my Lord, because that was the hardest part, was trying to follow along. And I still missed stuff. And that site is, and it was, and I was like waiting to spend like a fortune on it. It was like, oh, this is like super cheap for what I get. And those are two reasons why I was able to get my ratio as low as I have gotten it. And that's one of the reasons why audiobooks have been sustainable for me, because before it was taking me 4 to 6 weeks to record an audiobook. So even if I was getting union scale, it's going to be kind of hard to keep the bills paid doing just that. But now that I can get a book done, depending on the length, in a week to 2 weeks, depending on how much time I can devote each week, that opens up the potential for me to record a lot more.
So let me talk about what positron is. But first, let me go back and say, Siobhan, to your question, which I think someone chatted the question about what percentage of your time is spent recording the book versus editing. Everyone should remember that the answer to that question will vary greatly, tremendously, based upon the quality of the writing and even the format of the writing. Sometimes we are sent books with small print because the author is unable to give us a digital file, and therefore we have these like real small, like a paperback book, and every time you flip a page, now you have a page turn noise. I mean, that's really like the worst case scenario. And sometimes we get a manuscript and we could triple space the lines, and we could write on our screens and change words throughout or put notes throughout an entire book very easily. For example, if there's a character's name that's difficult to pronounce, we can go through and do a replace all, respelling the character's name so it looks more like it's supposed to be pronounced. And so, yeah, the answer is the answer varies a lot. There are multiple steps in recording a book, and Brian, you should talk about this more than I should. But one of those steps I'll talk about toward the end of your process is making sure that what you read is accurate, especially with a subject like contemporary classic, where you really can't change the words. You shouldn't change the words. And so what an audiobook narrator typically does is when they think they're done, they either hire someone to review the book or they review it themselves. You listen, you proof listen. So that means if you have a 10-hour book, you're spending another 10 hours going through it, staring at the manuscript or the book and listening to the recording and seeing if you have any mistakes. This site that does that for you is called Positron. It's a way to sort of upload the file, upload the text, and the system tells you where you messed up. It's great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think it's Positron with a Z, P-O-Z,
Yep.
if I remember correctly.
POZ. Yeah.
Correct. In the chat,
Positron,
everyone was
yes.
like, "What? Where is that? What are you guys saying?" I was like, "Yeah, that's a funny name." So it's in the chat, everybody. Don't worry. We got. Don't
Yeah.
panic.
It is. That was an absolute.
So we should
lifesaver.
say to save the chat, everyone. Okay. Or Siobhan, do you want to talk about saving the chat? Because when this meeting is over, that chat disappears forever, right? So do you want to talk about that, Siobhan?
Absolutely. If you desire to save the words that you see in our beautiful chat box from all these beautiful people, including, myself dropping links, the way you'll do that is by clicking on the ellipses at the bottom. It's your bottom right icon next to the emoji, and the very top above participant can chat, or above chat, it says save chat. And so you just save that puppy, and it'll be a really ugly plain text file, but it doesn't take up a lot of space that way. So that is good. All right, I want to keep this rolling, but we're not throwing punches, puns. So people, we have a lot of questions for you, Brian, and people are asking. Gosh, okay, some of these are kind of hard to answer. How about this? From Kyle. I just got a job at Pocket FM doing an audio series. Are there any other companies that do series? I like the format of 10-minute episodes and doing 75 episodes. I don't like reading an entire book, but doing 10-minute episodes, I get that instant gratification. Kyle, that sounds super fun. I mean, Brian, you may or may not have a response to that.
I don't know. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts and I would love to work with them, but I couldn't tell you where to find those series.
But these aren't necessarily podcasts. These are short stories. There are a lot of short story series out there.
Oh, I mean, ACX would be a place to find that. I mean, there's people that do that all the time. I mean, a big thing in independent publishing now, Amazon launched, I forget what they called it, but it's basically where it's short stories that you could subscribe to an author and you can like get short story episodic stories like every week, every month, or whatever. And there's a lot of authors right now who are publishing very quickly. That's one of the models for independent authors to make a go at actually being an author is it's called rapid publishing, and it's where they're basically putting something out every month, sometimes every other week. Now, as someone who's written things, I would question as to maybe is the quality where it needs to be. I don't know, but the audience decides, and if people want it, that is their choice. So there's a lot of options there. Again, looking for independent authors, but that's kind of like the extent of my knowledge on that particular front. I haven't done a lot of short stories. Most of my stuff has been like novels and whatnot, and series, like longer, like epic fantasy and sci-fi and whatnot.
We do love an epic. So Vern says, I can't even get past the ingredients label on a can of beans, so I know that the audiobooks are not in my future. Okay, so there's a lot of questions y'all are asking that are really specific to specific auditions and things like that. So I don't want to kind of But I like this one. Okay, this is from Jen. Brian, do you read the whole book before you start recording, or just the passage that you were planning to record? I guess, Jen, do you mean for an audition? Let's start with an audition, and then let's start when you're doing the book. Go ahead.
Well,
Brian.
if it's the audition, yeah, I'll read through the entire selection, because it's usually only a few pages. It's rare that, every now and again I'll get like a longer audition. And even then, for the audition, yeah, I'll read through the entire thing. When it comes to the book, no, I don't. I cold read. I can't tell you how I developed the skill, but I cold read just about everything I do. Now, what that means is that as I'm recording, I sometimes will realize a page or two later, oh, I need to make a different choice. And I might either make a note and no, I need to go back and record, or I might just re-record the entire section. So there are times where that might have cost me a little bit of time because I have to go back and make some changes when I realize something happened several paragraphs later. But for the most part, I don't. But I also know a lot of people who will read ahead, that they'll read the chapter ahead, or they'll read the entire book and they'll be making notes along the way. For whatever reason, when it comes to books, I'm able to do that. Apparently people like it because they keep hiring me. So I mean,
it's gonna vary. I know that I'm someone, I would have to read the whole book, because when the character dies, I'm shook. And it's just, I
I
can't.
tell you what, there has been more than one occasion while during the course of narration, because I was either surprised by what happens, I was caught off guard, and I was actually, started like kind of crying, just with certain moments. But in like this one fantasy series that I just finished, it was the final one, and there was a moment towards the end where I was emotional while I was reading it, but I left that in because I thought that was a nice thing. I mean, obviously I wasn't weeping and blubbering as I was narrating, then no one would understand what I was saying. But if you listen to that, there's like two very specific sections in that series where if you go back and listen to it, you can hear that I was I was like wavering. But I thought it, because of where it was in the course of the book and in the story, it felt very real. There was another book that I did where I was narrating about Serbian POWs during World War II, and the one POW who was Jewish, that was his last night before he was being shipped off to the concentration camp, and they talked about him doing his last Seder and all the other things. And it was, again, I actually had to like walk away and go downstairs. Like I had to like stop narrating for the rest of the night. I was like, it was very, very emotional. And when I went back the next morning and I went to narrate it, I still was having that reaction, but I was more under control. But so for me, that's one of the few ways I can probably get there. Where Siobhan, I don't know, maybe I know you've got more of an acting background than I, where you've got something else you can tap into, where maybe you don't need to be shocked as much. You don't need to be hit with an emotional cattle prod in order to get there.
I'd like to throw something in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Siobhan. Do you want to talk?
No, you go.
So I want to reflect a lot on what you just talked about, Brian, and also go back a bit. You talked about not reading the book up front, and I think that there is terrific merit to reading the book up front. There's also terrific merit to not reading the book up front. And one of I think the greatest things about not reading a book prior to recording it is that spontaneity, because you are hit with emotion. It is so genuine. It is so authentic. And now moving ahead, in our business, we cast audiobooks. We record audiobooks. So we cast audiobook narrators. And when we listen to auditions, the best thing the voice actor can do is be authentic. So Brian, you talk about reading an audition and becoming emotional with it. That is translated through your microphone, from your mouth through your microphone to our ears. And that authenticity comes through so loudly and clearly. And so when we cast audiobook narrators, we seek an audiobook narrator who we I guess I could say we forget we're listening to an audition. Like I want to listen to an audition, and 2 or 3 minutes later, when the audition is over and it stops, I want to think, oh crap, I forgot I'm supposed to be working, but like I was just enjoying a story because it sounds so real. It's so genuine. And that's great. So I would encourage everyone to read auditions cold. Then perhaps go back and record it again. It's only a 3-minute passage, right? So give yourself an extra couple of minutes of work, but I think it's worth it. Read it a second time after you've gone through it the first time. Read that, get that cold recording, and then listen back to both takes. And you might find that overall your second take is better. But for some of you, I bet the first read will be more authentic because it is spontaneous.
But it also, if you don't have a ton of time, you're going to want to pay close attention. Like people are in the chat are like, what, then later you learn that the character is Scottish and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I've had that happen.
Yes.
It's-
And Brian said that, like he has to go back sometimes to make another choice. And that's fine. Sometimes you can't get away.
I've had that happen, and my first instinct was to go to the author and be like, dude, no, basic writing. You need to say that at the beginning. That's not even for me. But then I'll go back and I'll shout down my demons, and I'll go and I'll re-record the dialogue for that character. Yeah, but I've had that happen, and yeah.
While we are discussing this, John is asking, can you elaborate on what the intro to the ACX class will cover?
Yeah, basically going over how to set up your profile. We're not going to go step by step because pretty much most people can probably set up a profile. We've been doing it for years, but kind of what some of the specific things you'll be seeing in an ACX profile that you might not see in other sites that you have done prior. We'll be talking about how to navigate and look for projects, what people are looking for, all of the thing. There's this broad overview of, so that way you can feel much more comfortable about diving into the site, how to use it, all of the things that you can possibly do. The nice thing about ACX, it's a very simple site. So it's not hard to navigate, but by the same token, because it's so simple, it can be a little unwieldy. So it's just showing you the ins and outs of what to do. And I'll show you some of the ways to catch yellow and red flags with projects. Sometimes I will say this, I've had 99% of my interactions through ACX have been nothing but positive. And even the ones that have not been like 100% positive weren't truly negative. It was just maybe there was some miscommunication or whatnot. I have heard, as we've heard with just about every other aspect of voiceover, there's always the horror stories of people who like finish a project and don't get paid, or then the project was used in a way they weren't expecting, or it happens. And that's unfortunate. Sometimes there's little yellow and red flags, not necessarily ones that'll tell you not to do a project, but one that'll like prompt you to ask more questions. And that's something we'll be going over as well, how to spot projects that might be problematic depending on what your goals are. But that's going to kind of be like the broad overview of it, is to kind of dive in and show you what to look for there. We will go, we might get, if we have time, we might go into a few like auditioning, like what you might want to look for in auditions and whatnot as well, as far as how to deliver that and whatnot. So
Ryan, so let me ask you a question then. If someone coaches with you for audiobook narration, how well can they use those skills for long form narration? So not audiobooks, but any long form narration, corporate training videos, documentaries, and so on.
I think it translates pretty well. I think there's some foundations, if there's some foundational voiceover skills that honestly, I think looking at what I've done now are in narration, that then I was able to build on and take that into my audiobook stuff, and build on and take it into commercial. Because I think narration, like longer form narration, explainer videos, I think is very, very foundational voiceover. So yeah, I think if it's same thing though, I think it's reverse engineering it. You can absolutely take the stuff we're doing in audiobooks and apply that to doing other narration projects. The two are very similar. It's just one is a lot longer. Maybe the pacing is a little bit different. There's like minor differences. but one that I think that, because I started in audiobooks and picking up narration wasn't very difficult. I will credit that to James being an awesome coach, but I think because I had kind of had some idea of like, oh, I can speak without stuttering and say the words that are on the page, that it seemed to translate pretty well.
Brian is referring to James Andrews, who is one of the coaches on our team and just terrific.
And he
Great
has a
guy.
class coming
Great.
up.
I'm
He
sorry.
does. Okay, look, well, let's go. Let's go with the plugs. This is coming this month. Gosh, wait, next week? The Science of Speaking Like a Pro, the amazing oh boy, I need to take this class. Pathologist's guide to speaking, and everything that James has learned in his many careers for such a young man, that make him the fantastic voice actor that he is. This class is so popular. People are huge fans of it. I've had the pleasure of taking it and being part of it, and I highly recommend you get in on that too. Now, I've also wanted to, I had some like really awesome questions up here regarding this. Brian, I was gonna say, in your class, people are super curious about the audition process at ACX.
Mhm.
So, for my unsolicited whatever, you might want to get into it in your session coming up,
Absolutely, we can absolutely do that.
because yeah, there's a lot. So, okay, then I'm
Ma-
like,
Well,
yeah.
you search for a question. I think there's a topic that would be helpful for everyone to hear, Brian. The difference of narrating nonfiction and fiction in general.
Mhm. I think what I've found is that I nonfiction requires more heavy lifting. And the reason why I think it requires more heavy lifting is that generally, not all the time, but generally, it doesn't have quite as clear of a voice. Nonfiction tends to be very informative. Sometimes the author does a very good job at bringing their voice to the project, and it makes it like almost feel like you're telling a story. You know, when you get into doing, at least for me, I find that doing fiction work, it's kind of easy to do in terms of figuring out the point of view, because it's written with a point of view and a main character or main characters, and there's a story being told that hopefully has a beginning, middle, and end if it's been done properly. Whereas nonfiction doesn't always have that in the same way. So I have found it takes more heavy lifting. But what I've also found is that if you can find that voice and you can figure out how to bring that alive a little bit more, that makes it makes the experience much more enjoyable for me, the narrator, but I think it also helps with the listener, because if you just want to read a dry textbook, go read a dry textbook. But if you can add something more to it, a great example was I did a book last year, a nonfiction book about shark conservation, and it was great, and the author's voice was very clear, because when I met the author and fun adventures in voiceover, I did this book, and then because he was so impressed and the publisher were so impressed, they invited me down to Miami for 2 days last summer to go on a shark tagging trip on a research vessel. So I got to spend 2 days with the field school in Miami, which was very, very cool. And everyone that I spoke to said they thought that David, the author, they thought he narrated the book because it sounded exactly like the way he talks. And we had never met before. So, and he's from Pittsburgh, and he only made me say yins once. So I'm thankful for that. But I think that was a fun example. There have been other ones I've done where the voice wasn't quite as clear, and I've had to do maybe a little bit more work to figure out, okay, what's the point of view here, to make that stand out a little bit more and make it a little bit more interesting. That's been what I've, in my experience, that, and with nonfiction, even there, depending on who the author is and what the expectation is, you sometimes in fiction get a little bit of wiggle room, sometimes like this much, if you're not getting 100% accurate to the page. If you mess up, if you juxtapose like two words and it doesn't change the sentence, maybe you can get away with it. Not in nonfiction, because it's informative and it's usually very factually based. You got to be 100% accurate. And then on top of that, if you've got pronunciations in there, like a shark book, which had a few of them. Where ichthyologist was probably the easiest word. Then again, you have to make sure you have that down. So there might be a little bit more heavy lifting on that end too, making sure you're saying the words properly.
Nonfiction is also much shorter on average.
These are
Yes. Although one of the ones I just did was about a 10-hour long political
Really? Wow,
science
that's
book.
yeah.
It was a good one, but
We had a 21-hour nonfiction book, history book, but usually nonfiction is shorter than fiction. So
yes.
and you can most of the time you can get a pronunciation guide from the publisher or the author, which is helpful, and
Mhm.
you can get that for nonfiction also very often.
there are so many. The first thing I want to do is just honor and acknowledge and applaud this community. You all are answering each other's questions really beautifully, and you are all so smart and so nice, and I really appreciate the way you treat each
Oh.
other. Really sweet and wonderful. Tim has a cool question. I know Audible has a really nice studios in Newark, but do you know of Brian, do you do any in-studio work, or are you all home studio audiobook baby?
The only time I have been in a studio to record was my narration demo at Edge,
When we met?
where we met. And all of the other work that I have done, I do from my home studio. Which, listen, if Audible said, "Hey, Brian, come up to Newark and come up and record," yeah, that's awesome. Being in a studio is awesome. There's just an energy to being in a full-fledged professional studio with an engineer, and there's an energy about that. But I do appreciate that my commute is about 6 seconds. So there is that. And when I went to Edge, I had to wear pants.
Thank you.
Not
Okay,
because
Please
I was
don't
in New
stand up
York.
now.
let's move on. Okay, so
I want to give a shout out, James Romick. James, I've seen a bunch of your texts here. 22.5 hours.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a real good one.
okay, Brian, how often do you get to work with the authors? Is it common or rare, especially when you're working with independent authors?
It depends. I've started to call that the Goldberg rule. It depends. The when I've been working with ACX and things through that and referrals, I'm almost always working with the author directly. So for better, for worse. For better, because I have a direct line to this person. There's no middleman. I can ask them questions directly. As I said, I've gotten to make friends with a few of them, which is very nice. The downside is that they're not very familiar with audiobook production. So sometimes there's more hand-holding that needs to happen there, more education. And it's that in and of itself is a skill. Can you do that without being mean or condescending? Because I don't want to be that way. I don't want to be like, well, no, I don't do that. Voice actors don't do that. Blah, blah, blah. And I've had to be firm sometimes when I had one author who was insisting that I say the word water as water. And I was like, no, because that's not how we say it in the United States. So there's some more hand-holding there. When I'm working with some of the other production companies, I have almost zero contact with the author at all, because I'm dealing with the production company. Now, the upside is I'm dealing with audio production people. So on that side, it's much more professional, but now I have a go-between. With that book last year, it just so happened that we connected over Twitter because I tweeted something about it and he DM'd me, and but I let the company know that we were talking and they understood, and it was fine because we weren't conducting business, outside of that. So,
Brian,
yeah.
have you ever had a directed session from your home studio?
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
No. No. I have had 3 directed sessions. One of them was my very first union gig, which was very, very cool. It was for like 5 lines in a podcast, an audio drama podcast that actually they just dropped the first episode 2 weeks ago. So they just dropped episode 3 today, and I was in the very first episode. I do the voice of a cop. And it was very cool because I found it after the fact. Oh, and by the way, we have to Taft-Hartley you for the union stuff. And I was like, Oh, I did a union gig. Means I got 2 more before I have to join. But I've done other ones, yeah, for like commercial and narration. One where we were about halfway through, and then another manager jumped on the line and then completely reversed the entire direction of the session, of what the direction was. It was like, okay, and went back to it. And I will say on that, they did actually try to keep me on for longer than the initial session, and I told them no, because they only paid me for 1 session. I said, well, if you want to keep me on for another hour, you got to pay me my session fee. And well, no, it's like, sorry, them's the breaks, and but most of the time I get to work from home by myself, self-directed. So yeah.
So it's more of a rarity.
For me, it has been a rarity. Yeah.
Yeah.
And to that, I would say for anyone who is going to get into audiobooks, really any voiceover, because almost everything is recorded from home these days, self-direction is so, so important. I cannot stress that enough. You need an amazing ability to self-direct your auditions. And then you need that ability again to get through the actual project. So the client's happy and you get a repeat client. So you really want to focus on gaining the ability to hear what you're doing.
I just saw a question about if audiobooks are union. I'm not union. But working for the company that I do get paid union scale, and they do make contributions to the SAG-AFTRA retirement fund, that if I were to join, I would already have credit there. So I haven't had to be union for certain gigs. But if I did join, I'd still be able to do audiobooks.
Boom. And James is dropping more info in the chat regarding all of this union and non-union work. And Greg is asking, how do I connect with David Goldberg? And that's a great question. Wow. The quickest way is to get a session with him, and you can do that by emailing training@edgestudio.com. And as we reach 6:57 Pacific time, I know it's much later for my East Coasters, I want to just go back to giving us these announcements and little linkies for your viewing pleasure. The Science of Speaking Like a Pro happens with James Andrews next week. Oh my God, next week, because it's Thursday. I really remember, time and space will never make sense to me ever again. And Terry says, you better be ready for that session with David.
Oh, what session?
You just got to really prepare if you're taking a session with David.
There's a guy I'm looking at, Duncan, you're on my main screen here. I worked with you today, but I'm not sure what sessions, who's talking about a session with me?
No, they were saying if you want to get in touch with David, the easiest way is a session. But you better be ready. And yes, you better be ready. Okay. You will be put through your paces.
He's got it. He's
I thought I won the monthly audition contest.
Well, Duncan's on. You guys can see him on the front page. How was your session today? Thumbs up, thumbs down. You're muted, unfortunately, but 2 thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Okay. Intro to ACX, the class we are talking about. That happens May 7th. Everybody should go and hang with Brian, dive into the ACX world. Y'all had a lot of questions that I cannot answer during this time, because this time is for more broader things than the specifics we're getting into. But when you take your training sessions, you get to ask all of these things. A group class is a great way, but even better than a group class is if you book a one-on-one. And this is our offer. If you get this 3-pack, when you put Brian in the notes, then you get his class as well as the 3-pack. And then you can ask him all your little detailed stuff. You want to know what mic he's using. You want to know his digital audio workstation. I see you asking the detailed questions, and that requires a little bit of one-on-one time, because we will be here for more than 24 hours if we got into the nuts and bolts. But in an hour with one person, you actually have the time to get into the things you want to get into. And finally, y'all, Home Studio Show and Tell is back May 2nd. And by that, I mean, I'm doing it again. I think David, did you have to do it without me too? I can't remember what's going on.
Yeah.
David's been on. I have left him high and dry, but back on May 2nd, we'll be there again for some good times at 6 Pacific and 9 p.m. Eastern. Brian, any last minute words last closing remarks as we close this session?
I got nothing.
Okay, great.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. I could stay here for so much longer, but I know we got to go. So, but thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
David, any last words from you as we close tonight out?
Yeah. And my last words will not be, it depends, as some of you get the joke. I want to thank Brian, because Brian is just giving of himself, volunteering to be on this call tonight to answer your questions. So Brian, thank you. And I'm thrilled that you have joined our team. You've been on the team now 5 months, whatever it's been, 4 or 5.
5 months. Yeah.
5 months. Cool. He's awesome to work with. Siobhan, how long have you been with Edge now? 7 years, 8 years?
A long time. I'm not old enough for it to have been that long, but it's been.
Well, I thank you also. And most importantly, I thank all of you hanging out for this hour. If you have any thoughts on Ask Me Anythings, email our office. The email address is training@edgestudio.com. There were some people asking questions how to speak to some of us. Just email training@edgestudio.com, and we are super duper responsive. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. You really ought to join the home studio show and tell. It's free, like tonight. It's the you can find it on our website. It's the second Tuesday of the month, right, Siobhan? And all it is that 2 voice actors give tours of their studios, and then everyone else talks about it. And we do let a lot of people on like to talk. So there's amazing discussions. Everyone shares ideas, shares equipment, shares thoughts and suggestions. It's amazing. So you should definitely partake in that. Anyway, thank you all.
Shenanigans, we got more shenanigans for you then. And you also have shenanigans in Brian's class. So we hope to see you in all of those spaces. Everyone, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for chatting it up and being it's just a beautiful community of beautiful people. Terry, great to see you. So glad. And everyone looks good. John, thanks for being here. Geddes, we got Jerry, Courtney, thank you. Bina, thank you. Tim, all right, y'all are the best. Happy spring to you all. And we'll see you at home studio, and we'll see you Thursday. Oh my gosh, I can tell you it's gonna be the 18th. Yep, see you on the 18th for AMA once again, same time. Mwah. Good night, everybody. Bye.
See ya.